Welcome to another edition of the Leading Ladies podcast here at GreenKite. I'm really happy to welcome today Charlotte Metier. I'm saying your name right, aren't I? Metier?
It's Metier.
Metier.
Yes.
Oh, I'm
it's not
sorry.
as glamorous as the Metier French version.
Metier from the Alzheimer Society. And I just wondered if you could just share with everybody what your role is and how you ended up working for such an amazing organisation as Alzheimer's and what it is that drove you to do that. I think it'd be good for everybody to understand, we live in a very technical insurance world. And there's a whole other world that we support. And I think it'd be great to hear about your way into that.
Thanks, Karen. Yes, so I'm Charlotte Metier and I'm the Associate Director of High Value Partnerships and Legacies at Alzheimer Society. I've been with Alzheimer Society about 9 years now. I've always worked in the charity sector the last 25 years. It was always something I felt really passionate about growing up. That was mainly in international development, but my grandmother developed dementia and I was very close with her. And as life often gives you these serendipitous moments, I had the chance to move over to Alzheimer's Society just after Nana passed away, actually. And it was a really amazing opportunity to come into a field at the time where dementia was really in a state of being quite hopeless.
Yeah.
And, no progress, lots of a sense of, it's just inevitable. There's nothing we can do. Into a time where we are now, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, where there is huge amounts of hope and opportunity. And my aunt has now been diagnosed with a very aggressive form of dementia. So it's very personal to me.
Yes.
And I want there to be a different future for me, but also for my children. But it's also professionally one of the most, I know we will be the generation to change dementia and be the generation who finds treatments, makes it something you live with, not die of. So to be part of that is thrilling, really.
It's fantastic. And it does, I think, feel like we're on the threshold of some really important breakthroughs, which again,
definitely
we will talk about. The other thing I think it's important for us to mention here is the IUAD, which is the United Against Dementia Insurance Industry Initiative, which is sort of umbrellaed, if you like, by the Alzheimer Society, where we have that significant link with you. And what we will do at the end of the podcast when we share it with everybody is we will make sure that we share the links to anything we talk about here so you can all reference it after you've listened to us. So, the IUAD has been amazing. It's raised £10 million.
Yes, big
so
moment.
far.
Yeah.
It's a huge thing for the market to have done.
Enormous.
And I think, and certainly from my perspective, sitting here as a chair of GreenKite, we took part in the Miles for Memories. It's our charity of choice again, IUAD, for 2025. And I think actually I've been told that we're hosting a charity quiz night for you guys on IUAD at some point this year. So again, we'll share links to that as well. So it's something that we are all very passionate about, again, in GreenKite, because in joining with IUAD and Alzheimer's, and you talk to your colleagues, you find that you're not the only one, as you just shared. My father died of vascular dementia, and it's absolutely, it just rips the heart out of a lot of things in your family, and particularly, I think, for those around you. And there's a lot of focus on caring for the individual, but the effect it has on the loved ones, and particularly my mum in my case, they've been married for like 67, 68 years. So it's a real facer when it comes around to dealing with all of the other fallout. And so I think one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was the 10 million raised to date. What kind of things has that supported? Also, the next steps for IUAD and what should we be aiming for? And also, we spoke about this before we sat down here in the recording studio. For me, a lot of this is about hope. You just referenced it, and having seen what happened to my father, I do not want that to happen to me. And we talked about, before we came in here, how the impact of dementia on women. I shared with you in the 38 people in my father's dementia care home, 36 of them were women. And I found that I wasn't sure if that was just a coincidence, but I was quite shocked by that. So again, I've just thrown a load of questions at you. So first of all, if we just take a step back, what is the money that the insurance industry has raised today, the 10 million? What has that gone on to help support, or, whether it's care or whether it's research? Charlotte, what's been the focus for that?
Well, I think it'd be good just for a moment to talk about how it started, because it's quite extraordinary. Yeah. It's the only sort of campaign of its kind.
Yeah.
And it came from Chris Wallace, who's at QBE, was involved with Alzheimer's Society, but felt like he wanted to do more. And often, with any really extraordinary things, it's because somebody stood up and said, I want to do something different. That's how Alzheimer's Society started. Morella Kamen, whose husband had dementia, said, this is not acceptable. And she started the society. So Chris is one of those people who just makes stuff happen. And we came together with Benedict Burke and Paul Jack at the time and said, this sector, the insurance industry is unique. It's highly competitive, but it's highly collegiate. And they really wanted to bring the industry together to do something about what is the UK's biggest killer. So we sort of launched IUAD sort of on the back of a fag packet, thinking, what could we do? Let's have a really ambitious target.
Loads of the best ideas have started that way. So let me tell you, some of the insurance industry would understand.
And it felt quite audacious as a goal, but we really knew there were three things we wanted to do. We wanted to raise money for research because that is the only way out of this disease.
Absolutely.
We have to care for people better in the short to medium term, but we have got to have treatments and drugs to get us to a better place with dementia. We also knew that there are 350,000 people or so in insurance, most of whom won't really know a lot about dementia. There are high levels of misunderstanding. People think it's inevitable. They don't really understand what's happening. So we wanted to help share that information and signpost people to support. But we also wanted to help customers because we know that dealing with insurance, if you are living with dementia, is really tricky. And we've done some amazing things with different firms. So that was our ambition. And yes, this year we got to the 10 million, which is amazing. I mean, I had no doubt with the people we've had involved, and Richard Dudley's been the most recent chair and has been fantastic. So we had some pretty stellar people. We've also had 140 different businesses across insurance get involved. So this has been an incredible campaign. But to your question about where it's gone, we have been part of Alzheimer's Society was a founding partner in the UK Dementia Research Institute, the first of its kind, bringing 6 different universities together. And when we went into that commitment, there's no way we would have been able to commit to the funding if we hadn't had IUAD. IUAD were a founding funder in that and made that possible. And it's the different researchers within the DRI that have actually found this blood test diagnostic that we're looking at the moment. So a major barrier to any kind of treatment or support is that people aren't getting a diagnosis. So a third of people living with dementia will never receive a diagnosis. They will die not knowing officially what's wrong with them. Now, I don't think we would accept that for any other disease. And that's one of the things we need to tackle first and foremost is getting a fast, effective and accurate diagnosis that people will get much earlier. So as you will know, and I'm sure many people listening will know, when you eventually do get a diagnosis, it's often just of dementia. It's not specific, which means it doesn't open up any drug pathways. But it's also so late. It's essentially like getting a cancer diagnosis at stage 4. So any drugs, and there are drugs that are available, symptom-modifying drugs, but it's too late. Your brain is in atrophy. Your brain it cannot be brought back. So we need to get earlier, more accurate diagnosis. And the DRI is a driving force in that, which the IUAD funds have directly gone into.
Okay. Just to pick up a point there, because one of the things I learned in dealing with my father and the fallout around that is that you have to shine a light on these things. Hiding, I think for the best will in the world, sometimes people, for people's dignity, will choose to not talk about it, or choose to try and avoid a diagnosis. We'll put it down to other things, whether it's deafness, and that's what's causing some disconnects, whatever it might be. So I'm a big believer in that you have to talk about it and you have to shine a light on it, because I would say when you hide things, because people will hide things from their families.
Of course.
And that
there's
adds
a huge
to that
amount of stigma about dementia.
There's a huge amount of stigma, isn't there? We've got to get to a point where we understand it's okay to talk about it and okay to sort of get your family to talk about it and help you make the hard decisions.
Because they're coming.
Because they're coming and know what they might be. So I think for me that part of that is getting people to talk about it.
Yeah, and that was an absolute aim of the campaign as well. Through our Dementia Friends program, we've made 18,000 dementia friends across the insurance industry. And that is a very short information session which just breaks down some of those misconceptions, because stigma is an absolute barrier to people getting a diagnosis, going to the doctors in the first place, getting the support they need. A lot of people we talk to are dealing with the very challenging caring on their own. So carer breakdown is a massive challenge. And the reasons for that are that people don't really understand this is a disease of the brain. You wouldn't be ashamed to talk about having breast cancer or liver disease. So we need to get dementia into that same space. It is a disease of the brain, and there should be better support and understanding of that.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier just 140 companies across the insurance industry. And they are obviously managing agencies, there are brokers. Is it any company that's associated with the insurance industry that can be part of this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's no barriers around
We've worked
that,
a lot with general insurance, but we're also working with life protection. We've had a great opportunity to work across the whole industry. As we kind of go back into our second stage of the campaign, we're really keen to broaden that out, work much more with regional brokers. We want to look a bit more into personal lines where, of course, there's a very strong customer angle. Reinsurance is an area. We've had some partners, but we'd like to talk more to any part of the industry because every single business, this is affecting you in one way or another, either through your colleagues or your customers. But this is a major pressure on our economy, on our workforce. So there's a value exchange there as well, which I think was also important to us starting this campaign. We're not just here to raise money. Like none of the good research can happen without money. But this is also about better supporting people and also raising that awareness and trying to find a way to do a better service for people with dementia. So great piece of work we did with Sedgwick. We looked at their claims process end to end and what that would be like. And people with dementia go on a panel and they are essentially a focus group and they say, oh, actually, at this point, it becomes really challenging for us. If you just change this, it would be much better. And we work with vulnerable customer teams, etc. That's where we also want to continue to make a real difference and give back to the business that we're working with.
Okay, because I think that's something that we can stress in the narrative when we put out the podcast. That this is something that, you don't have to be you can be any company in the insurance industry that can think about coming to help. And particularly with some of the big life companies as well that have research arms. I don't know if you've ever hooked up with any of them and sort of shared joint research, or they might be looking at how, I know some people look at age-related things and the impact on their customers. So I think there's a great opportunity for the market to be involved in many ways. My experience of it is it's a very technical, it loves a challenge. It loves research. It loves inventing new products and supporting new things. And so I think for me, the partnership with the IUAD sort of hits a lot of boxes from that aspect, because I think there's obviously the social side of it, but it's this research side, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's really key.
Dementia, insurance is about protection. And I think there's a lot of different angles we could look at. We used to talk, I remember in the first kind of the early stages of the campaign, is there an opportunity to do something like dementia re? We've had pool re, flood re. Is there a dementia re product which would allow the industry to price products around, kind of protecting against your care costs? Or no, we're not there yet, and we know that this government certainly doesn't have the cash at the moment to put things up. But I think there's potential in the next few years to look at what could products look like that give a layer of protection to people. But I think also on your point about research and data, as the government's just announced a big overhaul of kind of joining up data sets and health data. The NHS is one of the best sets of data across the world with lifelong health data. We also have data within Alzheimer's Society about the experiences of dementia. And I think we need to look at how we could use that better. We could join it up. So I'm sure there's some learnings that we could take from, certainly in the life area of insurance, about how we could better do that. Navigating all of the obvious ethics that there are around personal data. But I do think that's an untapped area for us particularly, but also, crossing over with the insurance industry and how that can help us to better support customers.
Yeah, and we just touched on how the IUAD funding has helped on the research side of things. Can we just perhaps... And I'm not even going to attempt to say the name of some of these drugs because it's like far too long. But there are some new treatments, there are some potential new drugs that will slow down the. Can we just talk a bit about those advancements? And I think it will be interesting to hear your take on that and perhaps what's next for the research side of it. Because I think for the insurance industry, the research and next steps is something that they really understand.
Yes.
And I think when can see and get behind that, push forward and for the next
we all want
targets.
To back a winner, right? We all want to feel like there's success coming. And so so everyone will have, I'm sure, been aware of the announcements over the last 6 to 12 months of 2 drugs that were approved as safe and effective but were not approved for use in the NHS. So they're lecanemab and donanemab. It's really mixed emotions about that. I mean, everyone was absolutely so over the moon and excited because these are the first drugs in over a decade that have been found to be effective.
And that will slow down the symptoms of
so they will slow
terms
down
of memory sort of loss,
cognitive decline, and all of the symptoms that come with that. So essentially giving you longer with a better quality of life. So you're pushing back the kind of the most acute symptoms for later on. So buying us more time. These aren't silver bullets. No one's ever said they were, but they are the kind of vanguard drugs, if you like. So very exciting, and actually based on research that one of our very first fellows that we invested in and funded their research, so John Hardy, found the amyloid protein in the brain.
Yep.
So that's a super exciting, it also shows how long it can take for some of these things. But we invested in him years ago, 30 years ago, and these drugs are based on that research that he did, that finding. But what I would say is, whilst those two haven't been approved, and they'll go back through, and it will, it's not a one and done, they'll be reviewed again. There are 140 other drugs in late stage clinical trials coming behind them.
Sorry, just say that again. How many?
140.
140.
Yes.
Blimey.
So, there is very good reason to be hopeful that some of those will come through, will be signed off, and will be more cost effective.
Yeah.
So we've got to balance, not just does the drug work, but is it cost effective for the NHS to actually put it into patients? And, these two, lecanemab and donanemab, would be for a small number of people at very, very early stages. So this is back to my point about diagnosis. Whilst we're really excited about the drugs coming through, and we are, a big part of our research agenda is funding early career researchers and keeping them in research, because they can only do the research where the grants are. If you take the grants away, they move into a different area. They go to cancer or heart disease or wherever else. We've got to keep them in dementia. Big priority for us. And that's something that the insurance campaign directly funds. But we've also got to look at the other side of it, where we could have 20 drugs signed off tomorrow, but the NHS is not ready.
Yeah.
It hasn't got the diagnosis or the systems in place. So that's another part of our work that's, doesn't sound quite as sexy, but is really important. And I know that the industry will understand that. So that's another area that we really prioritize. And we're talking, regularly to Wes Streeting and ministers to say, is the NHS ready for when these drugs are coming, and what can we do?
Yeah, and that's the other challenge, isn't it? Because I think my experience of this is the ability to be proactive is just not there. You reactive, and depending on where you are in the country, which country,
absolutely,
it becomes a bit of a lottery as to what's available to you. Are there spaces? Mm-hmm. How do you source them? Where do you get the advice from? And sometimes you're just reacting all the while and never very sure if you're making the right decisions.
Yeah.
So I think that the two definitely go together, don't they? Are you also finding in terms of this research that drugs, maybe statins, I'm not sure, that or diabetes drugs, are also are you able to share research with other sort of sectors of the industry, to finding some drugs are having a positive effect that are already available?
Absolutely. Drug repurposing is another really promising area.
I knew there was a technical name for it, so thank you very much.
Don't look at me for technical things. That's a different podcast. But I think it is really exciting that we have had a number of drugs which we know, particularly around vascular dementia, because things that are working for blood flow and helping with cardiovascular disease have demonstrated some positive impacts for dementia. So certainly we are looking at that and repurposing drugs which have already been classified as safe. So that's a quick win in some ways.
Yeah.
So that is really exciting. Another thing that the UK DRI is amazing at doing is because it's this multidisciplinary approach, that exact point about sharing learning. So we've got Imperial involved, where it's taking an engineering lens on it. We've got different drugs that have been signed off being tested. So you can see some quicker progress rather than starting from the absolute beginning with a new drug. So both of those things are running concurrently, but that there is absolutely hope on the horizon. I mean, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we didn't really believe we'd be where we are now. Mm-hmm. And, I want to balance the hope with the agenda of we need more momentum. We are at the beginning of this journey. If we don't keep pushing now, we are not going to get there in our lifetime.
No.
So we are on the cusp, as you say, of something exciting, but we have got to continue investing in research, or we're just going to plateau, and we're not going to see the level of investment it's going to take to get us there. If you think about what happened with cancer, kicked off, amongst other things, with Nixon's war on cancer, enormous investment in drug development and research. And that's what made those huge breakthroughs. And like cancer, those first few drugs were very they were blunt tools. They didn't work for everybody. They only worked for certain types. That's exactly the same with dementia. Yeah. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, but there are over 100 other forms. So, when we get a drug, it's going to work. And these two are for Alzheimer's disease. They're not for frontotemporal dementia. They're not for vascular. So we've got to really invest in all of these different areas. So it is hopeful. I don't think anyone could say it's not the most exciting time.
It feels like it.
By 2050, our vision is Alzheimer's disease will be something you live with, not die of. I mean, that gives me goosebumps when I think about that.
Yeah,
that's possible. if we carry on and then continue to invest.
And so as we, having sort of had this tremendous milestone of 10 million that the IUAD have raised and all of those people that you referenced earlier. So if we look to raise the next 10 million through the insurance industry, that's going to be basically supporting more research, all of those good things that you've talked about.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I think for the other side that's important to me as well, and perhaps I don't know, whether companies that already participate in the IUAD, what can we share with our colleagues? What can we be involved in? I know you and I sort of talked about it a couple of weeks ago at your annual lecture, which we'll also come on to as well. What can we do with you to actually directly show our colleagues in industry what has actually happened? What can we see? Does that make sense to you? That there's something that we could go to? Can we go to a lab visit? Can we, because I know some of my colleagues in the industry would love things like that because they're very technically minded.
The first time I saw a fruit fly, I was fascinated. So it was lab visits are amazing. Yes, we do occasional lab visits. But like the lecture, we have an annual lecture which you came to, which we're going to put online as well for people to listen to.
Yeah.
I think that's a good start. Dementia Friends is one of the best first ways to get involved. It's a short information session, as I talked about. You can do it online. Sometimes we have people delivering them in person in businesses, and that for most people is actually busting a lot of the myths and misunderstanding about dementia. But it also gives you tools to go and talk to people about it. As we have found, every time we've done it, people in a business start saying, actually, I've never talked about this, but my mum's got dementia, or I'm driving 400 miles round trip every Thursday night to be with my dad, or, care home. And people aren't really talking about it. So Dementia Friends is a way of kind of opening up that conversation within a business, which is really valuable and helps businesses understand how they can better support their kind of midlife employees who are possibly part of a sandwich generation. They've got teenage kids and they've got parents who've got health issues. That's a huge challenge. I know for a lot of the women listening to this, that will feel very real. But it's also about business understanding if we're getting better at supporting with childcare and the flexibility required in those years, we also need to be thinking about what that looks like when you've got aging parents. And dementia is it can be catastrophic in terms of what that means for you as a family caring for it, or a partner.
Yeah, and I think our industry has got so much better at understanding that people are carers, as outside of maternity, paternity. There's other levels of care, and I would suggest, having experienced it, the stress that you have when you're caring for elderly parents is stress that I've never felt before.
So everyone,
it's different.
It took my mum to the absolute brink. I mean, it was very, very difficult to lose my grandmother because we were very close. But what I remember most actually was the trauma of what it did to my mum, who was running her own business. Or it does take you to the brink, and that's when you have financial resources. If you don't have flexibility or other family around to share the burden, it can be really devastating. So I think getting involved with Dementia Friends, we have an insurance day for dementia every November. Lots of firms, 2,000 employees across the industry took part last November. Great opportunity to do some, there's some crazy fundraising stunts that go on, but information sessions.
Okay, and
there's
a date for that already set for this year?
It is. I knew you were going to ask me that, and my team will be so cross that I can't remember.
I don't want
it's
the date.
Towards the end of November.
Don't worry. All I was going to say is we'll make sure that we share the link to the Insurance Day for Dementia whenever it is, but it's in November. That's fantastic.
I'll be in trouble now.
No, you won't.
So yes, that's another great way. But I think another thing is we have opportunities to volunteer. So during we've talked a lot about research, and IUAD has been a major funder of that. But during COVID, we also kind of pivoted where the ABI had a huge COVID support fund, and the industry really supported our dementia support. So particularly our support line, which receives 70,000 calls a year. Now, these dementia advisors who are on our support line are often the last line of defense.
Yeah.
You will know, lots of people will know, navigating the social care system is a total nightmare.
Yes.
Whether it's what benefits you're allowed to get, or lasting power of attorney, or what do you do when they're taken into hospital. So our dementia advisors are incredible people, do amazing work. And during COVID, it was honestly, it was like a horror show for
I'm
people
sure.
with dementia. And the insurance industry stepped up and funded a huge amount of our dementia support work. And out of that also came something called companion calls, where you can volunteer to sort of like a befriending call, but to just have a call with somebody with dementia, often who's living on their own.
Yes.
And I know that many people across the industry have taken part in that and got a lot out of it themselves, as well as really felt like they're giving back. So there's a few different ways to get involved.
No, that sounds fantastic. And I do think, because it's a disease that leaves you isolated, I think those lockdown years and COVID years just must have exacerbated.
We saw enormous acceleration of symptoms.
Okay.
Because isolation is a major driver.
Yeah.
If you're not keeping cognitively engaged because you're not speaking to people or going out.
You're going out and not, it's just
it was
combination of everything.
It was devastating.
So, if we can sort of pick up a point I sort of talked about earlier, before we came into the podcast today, I sort of asked you, are cases of dementia increasing over the years? And I'm interested, is it something we understand more because people are more willing to talk about it and there's research and we know about it more? Or is it to do with the fact that we're living longer, which is what you suggested? Is dementia on the increase, or is it hard to say? I think is what I'm...
There are more cases now because some of the driving factors. One, we are living longer. So as I said to you, age is your biggest risk factor.
Yeah.
The longer you live, the more chance there is you will develop it, because age is the biggest risk factor. But we also know that cardiovascular disease is a big risk factor for vascular dementia. So we have had, it's getting better thanks to lots of research, but we have had high levels of cardiovascular disease that has driven it up as well. And we know that there are lifestyle factors that increase it. So one of the things I think that really shocks people is that 40% of cases of dementia could be prevented with lifestyle factors.
Okay, I'm really interested in this. Okay, because I think
risk reduction is your language in the insurance industry. So things that we heard about at the lecture actually that you joined, hearing loss is a major risk factor for dementia, and that's because you are less engaged. If your hearing is compromised and you are less able to contribute in conversation or stay connected, that is going to sort of slow down your cognitive muscle, and it's not going to help.
And I will say to people here, Charlotte and I are sitting here with our glasses on. We go and have our eyes tested, people. Go and have your ears tested. I have my ears tested now, having seen what happened to my father. And, the joy of getting old is I have slight hearing loss in the left ear, but I like to put that down to mosh pitting, I think, in the 80s and too big a speakers. But we have our eyes tested. Go and get your ears tested.
Definitely.
It's fantastic these days. It's so quick and easy. And then you have a baseline to monitor your hearing loss on. And I think,
and when you know that there's an added benefit of it reducing your risk of dementia, I think that kind of galvanizes you a little bit more to go and do it.
It definitely
But
does.
So there's lots of risk factors that we understand more about. Some of them are all the things we don't really want to know, but are the truth, like don't drink too much, eat healthily, exercise. So, we can't get away from that advice. What's good for your heart is good for your head, and that will help you manage your risk of dementia. So I think there's definitely more that we could be doing there. And those factors have contributed to more cases of dementia. We also know that more women, to your point earlier, get dementia. Now, we don't really know enough about why that is, mainly because a lot of research has been done on men.
Okay.
And I think it was assumed for a long time it's because women live longer than men. That is possibly a factor.
But
it also could be
that's
hormonal changes during menopause. It could be all kinds of different reasons. So
joy, isn't
my
there?
point here is we don't know enough, and we need to be doing more research. That is the answer. I mean, dementia is chronically underfunded. So, last year, 61 people with dementia took part in a clinical trial. 100 times fewer than in research for cancer. So we are not going to see the progress needed if there's that level of disparity.
And is that because the funding, the lack of candidates within it's... I'm quite speechless about this now, actually. Is that because there's lack of funding for it? Or it's just... What drives that? Why isn't there more people taking part in those trials? I mean, what is that?
There's a few different factors. One is the money isn't there.
Right.
Two is, to our point about diagnosis. So cancer diagnosis is very accurate, very early, and that provides a pipeline of people into those trials. We don't have the diagnosis. We don't have it early enough or accurately enough. So once we fix some of that diagnosis, that will provide a bigger pool of people to go on to those trials. But we also know that the system around clinical trials is not there for dementia. which is why we've just launched a dementia research nurses program. First of its kind. Alzheimer Society are funding it. We've got our first 2 or 3 nurses have just been appointed this month, actually. It's super exciting. And our lead nurse is someone who has worked for Cancer Research UK and done this exact program with them. So we're really fortunate to have her leading it. And that will help drive better support around people. So those people who have got an early diagnosis, it is accurate and could be on a trial. She's sort of matchmaking and helping them to get in there. But there's a long road ahead for us to level up to cancer.
That sounds to me for a fantastic initiative. But again, that sounds to me like instead of having one visit, you need you need that to become part of our health service, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's our aim. We're working closely with Dementia Trials Network. So it's, we're working in partnership alongside the NHS and those settings. So it absolutely will be integrated. But, this is what I love about the third sector, if you like. We are the sector that can take the risks, that can get private investment, make things happen, pilot projects, which then get adopted by the state.
Yeah.
But it takes the third sector to step in.
So we've really talked a little bit, haven't we, about what's next. And so can we just go back to the impact of Alzheimer's on women? Because I hadn't appreciated it before until I visited my dad at the dementia home and found out of 38 people, 36 of them were women, and you worry that that's coincidental. And you sort of say possibly because it's people are, women live longer, which is factual. Is it because the research around Alzheimer's is just, as you say, not as well formed or as long-standing as, say, cancer research? And are there any barriers then to actually looking at and research and data from a gender perspective? Because I think it's a huge job, because women tend to be carers in these relationships as well. And
so that's the real double whammy. Yeah, more likely to get it as a woman and definitely more likely to be caring for a partner or a family member with it.
So what can we do to change that? I'm sorry, it sounds like a really inane question. Possibly it is, but how do we change that perception? I mean, that I didn't realise until this happened to me, possibly the risk factors of getting dementia as a woman. But it seems to be much more elevated, which just, again, this is supposed to be a conversation about hope, isn't it? So what can we do?
But I think you can't change something until you understand it's a problem.
Yeah.
So the first step is that we know that more women are developing dementia. So we need to do more research, and that's the first step. So are there issues or risk factors specific to women? So looking at the menopause is an area of research at the moment. Do the hormonal changes in the way it changes the brain, we don't know, is that a risk factor? Is it, how much of the risk is age, because we do live longer? So all of that, I don't have a definitive answer for you.
Okay.
We don't know yet, and that is kind of one of the challenges with dementia, is we've got so many pieces of the puzzle missing, and we need to fill them in. But I think one of your point about caring as well is that when we've talked a lot to people in the industry as well, is thinking about what is the financial security for women going into that situation, because unlike other diseases, when you are diagnosed with dementia, everything that happens from that point on, you are paying for yourself, because it's a care pathway, not a medical pathway. So you get a diagnosis of cancer, you get put onto immediate care, medical, a treatment pathway, care pathway that's funded by the state. You do not get that with dementia. So you're paying for it yourself. And the threshold for at which point you don't have to pay is extremely low.
Yes, it is.
So if you have any kind of assets, you are paying for it yourself. Yes, and that is, I think, a particular challenge for women who often go into retirement with fewer assets or less financial stability, whether they've had time out or they haven't invested in the same way in their pensions. So it's kind of there's a whole complex picture that I think is particularly pertinent to women around their risk factors of getting it, their likelihood to be caring for it, and their ability to financially withstand what is coming with dementia.
So there's a link here, isn't there? I think, and I think you may know about them. It's Ensuring Women's Financial Futures. I think I've got the name of the group, I think, but which I've been involved in the past.
Sean Fisher was an early member of the board,
that's right,
and she was involved. Fantastic
and there's a real link
work.
there, isn't there, as well? So I think,
and again, it's about protection. How can you protect yourself from what's coming? And at the moment, we don't have a cure, so there isn't any way of getting you back to what happened before you get a diagnosis, but you can protect what happens whilst caring and try and protect, if you like, the years when the symptoms aren't as so acute that it really affects your quality of life. And that's what we are about at the moment with research and treatments and better support and care from your employer and from the state.
And I think that harks back to my comment I made earlier. I certainly think that my experience of helping sort out my father's situation is everything's reactive. This is actually one area where we can be proactive, isn't it? Irrespective of the potential health aspects of what we might be facing in the future, we can actually be proactive about our own status at the moment, about making sure that we understand we have, powers of attorney, whatever it is that we need to put in place, we can be proactive around that. And that's something I think that needs shining a light on as well, because, I'd done some stuff with my mum, but I hadn't got powers of attorney from
and that is a minefield to navigate.
If you don't trying to do it,
if there's one thing we can ask the listeners to do, it's to make sure they know about powers of attorney and get it in place early.
And when you're dealing with the social services in any way, having a power of attorney is a massively powerful tool for you to be able to make decisions on the behalf of the people that you love. And so do that. Again, I think going in and talking about pensions, and it's something that we don't think about till we're much older. I've been doing it now. But actually, there's a really good reason to be proactive. And ensuring of financial futures as women is something I don't think we think enough about either. So it's good to find some things to be proactive about, Charlotte.
Absolutely, because I think it's about control. And I think that's one of the things when people ring our helpline, which we should definitely put the number to our dementia support line in the notes, because there will be people listening, I'm sure, who've got questions who need support. And it's important that, often the calls that come in, people are saying after the sort of the shock, and I mean, sometimes getting a diagnosis is a relief because finally they have a name for what's going on for them. But it is a shock, and it's not exactly good news. It's a terminal disease. But after that, their biggest concern is their finances.
Yes.
How am I going to pay for this? How am I going to work whilst caring? Or I've been diagnosed whilst in work. What does that mean? And so our dementia support line is brilliant. And we've actually been partnering recently with the Citizens Advice Bureau to look at benefits. And the average person who went through that process was claiming over £6,000 in benefits that were just left on the table because they didn't know how to navigate the system, which you pretty much needed a degree to deal with our benefit system. So, there's all kinds of support available for people through that dementia support line, and finances and the kind of your financial concerns is one of them. And so we're really keen to support people if they've got any questions.
Yeah, and I think from my own experience, I would hark back and say it's worth thinking about this because, as you said earlier, from a benefits perspective, what do you receive from the state in terms of care for dementia?
Yeah,
it's a bit of a low blow, and the cost of just a normal care home. Forget looking for something rather fancy and lovely that you all want to provide for your parents. The cost of just something is over and above the benefits they will receive from the state. So, as children, as family, you provide the balance between that and what the care home requires. And that is something to be mindful of.
There's very low awareness of that. And I think, we don't want to, everyone wants to think about retirement in a really positive way. And there's lots of amazing things to plan for and think about. But we also know getting into that stage without having thought about any of this can leave you quite exposed. So it's not about like doom mongering, but preparation is very important.
It is.
And I think certainly for women financially, that is something to be considered. But I do think in the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to see rapid acceleration of treatments and the opportunities for trials. And we will be in quite a different place, I think, in the next 10, 20, in our lifetime. I think we'll see an extraordinary change.
That would be fantastic, because I think the longer people can stay at home in the surroundings that they understand and enjoy, then that's for the better. Because I don't know if you get involved in sort of the standard of dementia care homes in the UK. I mean, some are great. The best ones are the most expensive ones.
Very few have had dementia training, which is one of our big policy asks, is mandatory dementia training for the social care workforce.
Yes.
So 70% of people with dementia are in care homes, yet less than 30% have had training in dementia. Now, anyone who has had a close relationship with somebody with progressed stage dementia will know it is extremely challenging.
Yes, it is.
And to not be training the care workforce not only is denigrating that profession, they are skilled, but it's saying that dementia, it's not giving it the value that it needs as a disease to be trained in, to understand better and to be able to care for better. And we know that good quality care can actually have really positive outcomes for quality of life, like anything. But dementia particularly is complicated.
Yes, it is.
So that is a big policy ask for us, and we really want to see the state committing to that.
Because I think one of the things I learned, and I think it is important to look. There is an upside. There are upsides. There is hope in all of this. And however traumatic it was to have to take my dad into a dementia care home, I would say, and he died sort of probably about a year after going in, but I would say from just living with my mum in isolation and with her doing everything for him and being very protective of him, I actually saw him improve when he first went into the care home, because it was social. There were people around. They would eat, enjoy eating together. And there was a period of time where actually he became much more sort of aware and enjoy and sort of a sense of enjoyment through moaning, I'm actually quite sure, about life in his late 80s. So there is as much as you think sometimes that you're doing the best to keep them, I found that going to put my dad into dementia care home actually worked for him before his symptoms just got too bad for anything to work, if you see what I mean.
There's no one right solution. Every family is different, and that's part of the challenge, is finding what's right for you at what time.
But then the thing that I did find, and I think this harks back to your comment, is that they lived in Leicester, so it was in not too far from where they lived, quite a small dementia care home, but the staff were the same for the whole year I was there. So I built up a relationship with the staff and the carers, and they got to know my dad. So they got to know what he liked, what he didn't like, where he liked to sit, the things he'd like to go out and do. And that made a huge difference, where I've got friends who live sort of more in the south, maybe in London, who don't necessarily see the same carers sort of week on week.
That continuity of care is really important.
That continuity of care is amazing. And I just wonder whether you get involved in, I think some countries have a real standard for dementia care homes, don't they? Whether sort of the low countries, for example, I think. Do you get involved in looking at that at all in terms of what's the best environment to build for a care home?
There's lots of research that we've invested in and been doing. I mean, the university, I think it's Stirling University, set out kind of dementia care standards.
Yes.
So we are, finding more and more evidence about what is good quality care that helps people live well for longer. We aren't kind of driving a big standard practice across the care sector. It's largely privately owned, and we do work with different care homes in terms of what does good care look like. But that is something, as I said, about training the dementia care workforce. It is a very important policy ask for us with this government to put that into place, because you're right, it can make a huge difference to their quality of experience, to how long they live. I think we've seen lots of evidence about where they are socially interactive, where they have that connection. It actually can bring them to life. Music is something that we know is really important. So our Singing for the Brain program, really powerful. People who are almost entirely nonverbal will come to a Singing for the Brain session in their community and will start singing a song word for word, because it's one of your last memories. We have this sort of bookcase analogy that if you do the Dementia Friends session, it's part of that, which is, you imagine you have a big tall bookcase and each book on each shelf is a memory in your life. And so the bottom shelf is your very earliest memories, going to school, when you got a pet, all those different things. And the higher up the bookcase you go, it's your more recent memories, the top shelf being what happened yesterday. And what dementia does to you is it starts to rock that bookcase. And so if you think about what would happen, it's the books at the top that fall off first. So you are losing what happened yesterday or last week or a few months ago. That's what happens. And the last memories to go are your earliest. So if anyone who's had a family member with dementia, it's the same with my grandmother, they just want to talk about things that were happening in their early life. But it's like they're still there because those are their strongest memories. And so music is there as well. It's a part of the brain that it's the last thing to go. So music, and having music in care homes and taking people to Singing for the Brain session, we know has a huge impact and is a very positive thing to do. And scientifically is also, we understand why it's working for you, but it's also a very positive, joyful experience.
Yeah. There's a book actually I read called Your Brain on Art, which is amazing. I don't know if you've
I've heard of it. Yes.
It's fantastic. It talks about the arts of singing, creating, painting, and the way your brain reacts when you do those things or take part in them is amazing. And I think that's such a fantastic analogy about the bookcase. And it's one that I think we all understand.
But it's helpful when you're with someone with dementia, because it can be quite frustrating that they're going back to those sort of early memories. And we've definitely heard people say, well, I'd go and see Dad in the care home. I'd take him out for a walk, but then I'd ring him the next day and he wouldn't remember where I'd been. And what's the point? And so we'd say, well, they might not remember the fact of you being there, but they will remember the emotion.
Yes.
So when you took them to the beach and they felt the sea spray on their face, or they felt you holding their hand,
and it was a great feeling.
That feeling remains, even if they couldn't place the facts of the day and when exactly it happened. So again, that's something that's really important to understand when you are in a caring situation, that, you know, these dementia friend sessions or talking to the helpline can help you just navigate some of that, because it is incredibly difficult.
It is. I was anything to my dad other than Karen. I was his sister or his mum or whatever.
Yeah.
But you just learn to let that go really quickly, because it does no good to either of you by saying, no, it's me. No, it's me.
Keep correcting them is,
you just got to let it go. And I think that's a lovely thing to say about how it makes people feel. And just don't worry about the fact they don't remember the instant, but they remember how it felt. I think that's lovely.
Absolutely.
Charlotte. It's just such a great thing to think about, as is the bookcase. That's a very good analogy. So I think, you know, if you wanted to sort of say, for the next 10 million that the IUAD is going to raise for you, because I do think they will raise it. I think our industry...
But a very ambitious board, yes.
Oh,
no
very
nonsense.
ambitious board. And I think that will definitely raise that money. What would you do if you had it tomorrow? What, out of all the things we've spoken about, what would be the thing that you would target first out of that fundraising? And by the way, if I win the lottery, you're getting it, all right?
Thank you.
The Euro Millions lottery.
They're on a really nice holiday first.
It's, it's on tape, so we're okay. But if you had that 10 million tomorrow, what would you target it at? What do you think would make the most impact most quickly?
I think there's a few different areas. I mean, we have talked a lot about research, and we have to think that that's the absolute priority.
Okay.
We turn down world-class research every year that we can't afford to fund.
Wow.
So there are world-class proposals for new areas of research that we can't afford to fund. So that's our priority. And that is quite a broad spread, but we are looking at the kind of what are the causes, understanding more about what's happening in the brain, because that will help us develop the treatments to target what's happening. So there is amyloid protein, obviously, as a main area, but there's also tau, there's immunotherapy, understanding what's happening at different parts. So I'd put some money behind that to understand more about what's going on. I would absolutely put more money into better diagnostics and getting the system ready. So we're really fortunate to win a big grant from the People's Postcode Lottery alongside the Alzheimer's Research UK to put £5 million into a blood test. Now, there are blood tests that have been proven to work, i.e. we can take a blood sample and we can tell you definitively whether you have dementia and what kind of disease is happening. But what we don't have is one of those blood tests proven to work in the NHS. Some need to have it refrigerated the whole time. Some need to be done in a lab.
Okay.
Well, that's not cost effective to get into every GP surgery.
No.
So this project is to test which test would work at scale across the NHS.
Wow. Okay.
But then once we've got that, we need to make it happen. So I would definitely put some more of the money behind better diagnostic tools and then our research nurses program, because that's the game changer. Getting more than that paltry 61 people in a clinical trial last year. We are not going to see change unless we can really pump prime and get more people in. So we need the research, we need the diagnostics, and then we need getting people onto trials.
Okay.
But then I also would have to say carers. Having been through the experience, and I know a lot of people on listening to this will have had an experience, we've got to do better for carers.
Yes, we have.
We've got to be able to support them. And our dementia support line is absolutely incredible. I mean, it's so emotional listening to the calls of what people are saying. They're at breaking point, and we need to do better.
Yeah.
Better information, better support, better access, better knowledge of how to navigate the system. I think we do that really well as Alzheimer's Society, but I want to put some more money into finding a really great carer support program that helps people to navigate and stay sane in the process.
Yeah, and I think that's something, people from companies here listening to this, to take back into your own companies and think about, do we do the caring side of it well enough around this? Because I think that silence around it is something that we need to break that stigma down around the silence. And
it's just interesting for the sector, because you talked a little bit before about paternity leave and maternity leave, and I think. And someone said to me the day, if you can just keep them in, would say come back from maternity leave or longer paternity leave, you can keep them in the business for 3 or 4 years, you'll keep them for life.
Absolutely.
Right? But we don't really think about that, about people in their midlife.
No.
So we're all going to be working well into our 60s.
That's joy.
Thanks to the current economy. But, if you can just get people through in midlife, through those few years of caring for a parent, you will keep them for another 10. And we don't want to be losing that talent from
we don't.
a sector.
And if I think about my experience with my dad, the reality is it was shorter than maternity leave. So I think that's a really quite an interesting way of thinking about it. So that support and help you need around that period where things are going downhill, and it's not infinite, it's finite. I think I read somewhere, again, little knowledge is a dangerous thing, isn't it? I misquoted that, I know, but I think something like 18 months is probably the maximum, or probably the sort of the median, really, that people stay in a dementia care home. You understand, and depending on the rate of the disease and rate of decline, you're looking at probably 9 months or something around that, a year.
Of acute time.
Of acute time where you need to be driving backwards and forwards, maybe going back and home and living for a bit and sorting people out and moving people around, maybe bringing them closer to you, different carers. There's a point where you need that space, and it's comparable to maternity leave.
Mm-hmm. And if the employer can understand that and give a bit of flexibility, we actually did some really interesting work with British Gas years ago where they were looking at their sort of sick leave, and what we found was that people were using sick leave to go and do things like getting a parent into a care home or sort out the fact that their mother had lost her false teeth in the care home, and they can fix most things, but they can't do that. And so they put in a kind of carers, a really great carers policy that we advised on.
Okay.
And they saw their sick leave drop, and people weren't taking the full allowance of carers leave.
Yep.
So it was a really interesting exercise in, just a little bit of support and kind of openness about what's going on.
Yep.
And you get the loyalty back.
Yes, you do.
In multitudes. So I think that's something we'd love to talk to more businesses about. And I'm sure there's lots of great examples across the sector already doing brilliant
I'm sure
support.
Companies are doing some.
But we need to
fantastic
keep
stuff.
that talent, and losing people at midlife, just as they're hitting their real stride and they've got so much experience, decades of experience behind them, to lose them from the industry. And once you're out, it's harder to come back in.
It is harder to come back in, and then companies end up with a gap. So they've got great young talent, they've got people at sort of the sort of end of their career bits, and they've lost this middle talent that's got all of that potential to be moving. And I think you're right. It's about keeping that talent, and we think about it through some lenses very strongly, but not necessarily through others. And
that's more acute for women. So we are talking about this as, it's not all women. I've spoken to lots of men who are dealing with the caring responsibilities, but it does impact women more.
Yeah.
And, insurance, like a lot of other industries, does not want to be losing more women. It wants to be keeping them and bringing them up through the pipeline and through the ranks of businesses. So this is something that I think is a real, we have to look at it, this factor, as a reason why people do end up leaving.
Yeah. No, I'm going to, is there anything you'd like to finish with? Was it a message about any of this, Charlotte? I mean, I wanted to talk to you about research and hope, because I think when you've experienced something, so it is traumatic. There's no other way of emotionally and physically, I wanted to talk about the upside, because there is an upside, and I think we've touched on that, and how it can impact all of the other areas that dementia affects in people's lives. So is there anything you'd like to tell people to finish this off? I mean, I loved some of your comments today that you've spoken about, how you make people feel, I think is lovely. So is there anything you'd like to sort of finish this off?
Thank you. It's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, if anyone listening needs help, please call our helpline. It is there to support you. We also have an online forum, which is an incredible resource of support and information. And so that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, I think, we are at this sort of crossroads, I'd say. We have these glimmers of hope. We've got drugs coming through the pipeline. There is hope like we've never seen before. And that is what gets us out of bed every morning.
Yeah.
And I feel genuinely privileged to be working for the Alzheimer Society, where we are at this point in time. So I want people to take away that there is absolute hope on the horizon. There's never been a more exciting time for the UK, what is the UK's biggest killer. I also, I think, want to say that, in our lifetime, this is going to be something that we live with, not die of. And that agency that we should all feel about getting involved with, getting yourself onto a research trial. We can all sign up to research trials. We can all take part in fundraising. We can all talk to our friends and colleagues about this is where to get support and try and break down some of that stigma. dementia takes away our sense of control and agency. As a person who has it and as the family members watching it happen, you feel extremely helpless. So anything that gives us agency, I think is really important. So I want everyone listening to feel like you do have agency. You can make a difference. You can be part of the generation that changes this. We all, just like the insurance industry is so brilliant at doing, we can all come together and do something as a collective.
Yeah, that's a great way to finish, Charlotte. You know, I've worked in the insurance industry for coming up far too long, nearly 40 years soon. I don't want to really think about that as a date, but blimey, it's a fantastic industry.
It is.
And I think the IUAD in partnership with you is something that I'm, as a member of the insurance world, it's just something to be massively proud about.
Hugely.
So what we've done is contribute across the market 10 million. Thank you, you know, for the IUAD driving it forward. That we've contributed 10 million to your research to date, and contributing the next 10 million is going to make all the difference in the world, because we're right on this cusp of it being.
We need to put our foot on the gas now.
Amazing, yeah. So I think thank you for sharing everything you have.
Such a pleasure.
We'll share all of the links and the things that we've talked about when we issue the podcast. There's links on there. But thank you very much. And insurance industry, the next 10 million, please, because it's so worth it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.